right, Maureen, I'm going to say a couple of words and then I will turn it over to you.
Sounds great.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. This is Angelica Vilpando with the Council for Opportunity and Education, and thank you for joining us for the Building Broader First Generation Services using Student Support Services as a Compass. I want to remind you that this is being recorded. We will send this this recording out along with the slide deck. It takes us a little bit longer as we take the recording and we upload it to YouTube. So it should be sent to you a week and a half to 2 weeks from today. At this time, the only way that you can talk to us is through the question and answer box. So please don't hesitate to send a question through the Q&A. You do not need to raise your hands. Because of the large volume of people that will be on this webinar, we will not be muting and unmuting people. We will ask you for you to put your question into the Q&A. We have put some time out to answer questions. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to COE's President, Maureen Hoyler.
Good afternoon, and let me thank you all for joining us, and again thank NASPA for the ongoing and very strong collaboration we have, particularly as it relates to improving, advancing, learning more about first generation students on our college campuses so that we can increase their population and graduate many more of first generation students. And with us today on this webinar is Dr. Sarah Whitley, who is NASPA's Senior Director for the Center for First Generation Student Success. And in the 3 years, which the center has just celebrated its 3rd year anniversary, Sarah's done an amazing amount in increasing the profile of first generation students on our campuses. Joined as well is Dina Weintraub, Dina Weintraub Stafford, who's the Assistant Director of the center. And lastly, Bobby McGowan, who is the program assistant for the center, who joined just as the COVID crisis was overtaking many of us. From the TRIO side of the aisle, first, I would like to introduce Sharante Maxwell, who serves as the Assistant Director of Access Programs at the University of Georgia, which includes 6 federally funded TRIO programs. She also started her TRIO career almost 20 years ago at Savannah State University. Paul Thayer is the former special advisor to the provost and associate vice president emeritus at Colorado State University. Paul spent his first 19 years at the university focused on access and pre-collegiate programs, serving as the director of the Center for Educational Access and Outreach. For the latter half of his career, he worked on retention, graduation, and student success strategies as director of undergraduate student retention and executive director of the Center for Advising and Student Achievement. Finally, he concluded that career, which we don't believe is concluded, as associate vice president for student success. Kicking off our program today is Gregory Martinez, who's the director of the Center for Multicultural and Educational Opportunities, which is located within the College of Education at Boise State University. So I'm going to, at this point in time, turn it over to Greg. As Angelica mentioned, we're going to, about halfway through the program, we're going to open it up for questions, and then we'll have a little bit of time possibly for questions at the end. But please do make note of your questions. We have a great mix today of both senior student affairs administrators and TRIO educators on the webinar, so we're delighted at the nearly 500 people that are participating. Thank you. Greg.
All right, thank you, everyone. Nice to see everyone here. I just am going to start with just giving a little bit of context, understanding the context of what we're doing here. So I just want to talk about some of the aspects of context at an institution, getting the institution on board with the goals of SSS programs, particularly working with low-income first-gen students. You know, there's many considerations to navigate when you're thinking about what to do on your campus. And all of these things that I'm going to talk about briefly here are, you know, influences, can be influences in various ways. And sometimes they're positive influences, and sometimes they can be negative influences as well, guiding the trajectory of how you're influencing the campus. So a couple of those things that I want to talk about is the size of the institution. That has, you know, a lot of implications. Big institutions can be much harder to get to important people in, as opposed to small institutions. I always kind of like it when I hear about institutions or SSS programs that are able to easily talk to their presidents. And that's usually true on real small campuses. Also, just the size of the divisions within the campus. How big is student affairs? How big are advising offices? Things like that. You know, for example, in the early days of my work at Boise State, I've been a TRIO employee for 30 years, since 1990 at Boise State. But student affairs was very small when I first started. I think there were 25 people in student affairs, and we could all sit around one table quite easily. That's not the case today. It's much, much larger. And if you're starting new on a campus with that kind of size, you know, you need to learn how to navigate. So part of it is adapting to those changes too. Who you report to can be very, very important too. In my case, as Maureen said, I'm in a college of education, and there's a little bit of history there, which I'll get into a little bit later. But you know, how close are you to people of importance, like vice presidents or deans? If you're further separated from those kinds of offices, there are coalitions to be built and collaborations to kind of work on to help you kind of navigate your way to important people who help you make decisions on campus. So the further away you are from, you know, those kinds of individuals, the more difficult the work can be, and certainly requires some navigation through the processes. Who's at the table is really important. I think if you do have some distance from people like VPs or deans, it's good to kind of figure out a good starting point to get work happening, perhaps with advising offices or dean of students offices that are generally doing a lot close work with students who are going to be very interested in the work that's going on with first-gen students in particular. There can be some pushback sometimes. I think pushback, it's good to recognize that sort of thing. I've been lucky on my campus. I think I've had a lot of support on my campus, but I know that's not true for everyone. There's been support within the center in terms of guiding the programs further, but you know, you do see pushback, or you get ignored by some people, and I think you want to try and navigate around people who might ignore, for example, or you're inviting people to meetings, or you want them at the table to speak to you about things, and they don't come, for example. Like one of my examples is a president that started in '03 when I first got a McNair program. In his initial feeling was that he wanted to kind of mention that the programs existed, but after that it was really hard to get him to engage in anything that we were doing. I invited him frequently, but he never really attended anything. And then I think the last thing I want to bring up is just financial pressures too. I mean, I think the financial pressures financial things that are going on campus can be really influential as well. I know that when just a quick story, in 2000, when student support service programs began having grant aid, and we needed institutional backup, I'm trying to think of the term, the 33% contribution that the institution had to make to grant aid. We went all over campus. I went all over campus seeking money, but I didn't, you know, at the time, the .com bubble had happened and no one was willing to provide any money. So timing with financial issues can be really important too. And I know right now, you know, we're in a kind of critical time financially. So those are all, but anyway, basically those are all good considerations to think about when starting to navigate such things. Okay, that's it for that. I think next was going to be Paul. Paul's going to talk about viewing the issue from differing institutional perspectives.
Thanks so much, Greg. It's just great to be with you. I was so excited about being a part of this presentation that after 3.5 months, I went out and got a haircut. I wanted to lose a little bit of that Albert Einstein look. If I don't look as all that debonair and suave as you see me now, just imagine what it might have looked like otherwise. Great to be with you. You know, I've tried to live my life in perfect and total symmetry. I know I'm hearing snickers from people who may know me, but indeed, I have divided my 40 years at Colorado State University into equal parts. 20 of those years, I worked in TRIO programs, both pre-college and collegiate level. And the other 20 years, I worked as an institutional leader for student success. And from that dual perspective, I have a real and deep appreciation of the ways in which the TRIO program perspective and institutional student success perspective are wholly complementary. Next slide, please, Jelly. But I want to start with a broader context and with attention to the times that we are in and at this present moment. And I see those in two dimensions. The first is increasing, really laser focus on institutional and the community focus on inequity, persistent inequities in educational outcomes and marginalizations of programs and staff serving underrepresented populations. You know, that marginalization sometimes make it difficult at some institutions, I hope it's not yours, to hear the expert voices of TRIO professionals. And the second is the severe financial consequences of enrollment declines and state support that are present in virtually every institution in the country. And that makes retention and student success, the return to the second year, the third year, the fourth year, on through graduation, absolutely critical to institutional financial health. Both of these cry out for the integration of TRIO programs, professionals, and principals in the interests of equity and fiscal solvency. Next slide, please. So from the institutional point of view, when I was an agent of the institution on behalf of student success, this was the question in my mind. We have an institutional strategic priority to increase rates of retention and graduation and eliminate retention and graduation gaps for first-generation low-income students. So where do I find the best resources for improving outcomes? Because I want to make a difference, and our institution is committed to making a difference. Next slide, please. So where does one look? And as I looked around our campus, there were certainly many people and many programs on the campus that valued and interacted with first-generation low-income students. But on my campus, and chances are on your campus, there's no campus program that has focused so exclusively on those very students for so long, with such depth, and with such detailed outcome data as student support services. Next slide, please. And as we look at student support services, there are a number of assets that we would want to take advantage of. The first is that sole focus on first-generation low-income students, students with disabilities. Second, the comprehensive set of strategic strategies designed to structure students' experiences in order to enhance each student's success. A whole lot of the power underlying student support services approaches is that coherent set of strategies, all designed to structure students' experiences. There is great power there. Third, the depth of understanding that resides in the staff of Student Support Services program, the understanding of first-generation students' experiences, and equally as important, the dynamics of those student interactions with the institution. That's a perspective and an understanding that the institution deeply values. Next, the exceptional levels of detailed data, including outcome data, that again, TRIO is characteristic of TRIO programs. And in most cases, the recognition that TRIO programs have been responsible over decades for often unrecognized effects on institutional retention and graduation levels and gap closing. Next slide, please. Now, from the program perspective, people are looking at it this way. We're ready and anxious to contribute to institution-wide efforts, so long as the integrity of our program is maintained and so long as we are an integral part of those solutions. Next slide. Now, there are considerations that we want to attend to. First, we must maintain the integrity of grant regulations, but that leaves room for lots of room for contribution to broader institutional efforts, as Maureen is going to describe more fully. Second, the concern that our contributions be fairly recognized and that we be integrated into the planning, the discussion, and implementation of what might proceed. Third, that our long and deep insights about students and student success strategies present a whole range of possibilities for application in the institutional setting. On the one hand, there's the opportunity to inform institutional thinking and planning and to position the program and the professionals in the program to be able to inform and influence institutional thinking and planning. Another level of possibility is replicating aspects of the model. This works so well, why don't we take a part of that and we'll replicate it in these various ways. Again, with full input and involvement of the TRIO professionals. Or another alternative might be to expand the capacity of the program to serve additional students and make an ever greater impact. Lastly, the recognition that relatively small numbers, when strategically targeted and outcome focused, can have demonstrable and dramatic impacts on institutional success rates and gap closing. Next slide, please. So at the end of this, there's a really logical match of interests. From the institutional perspective, the question is, given SSS experience and success, what can be learned from the model? And beyond that, how can we more fully integrate the program and staff in order to serve institutional goals and magnify outcomes? And from the program perspective, how do we enter into the institutional discussion, helping the institution to see the ways that we can more fully serve institutional priorities? And how can we integrate with and become ever more salient in institutional priorities while always maintaining the integrity of program requirements? So to address some of those points more fully, Maureen, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Paul. We really appreciate both of your perspectives. So again, thank you. Next slide, and let's move to the next slide after that. I guess, let's go back one slide, I'm sorry. So typically, both the senior administrators on a campus and the TRIO director on a campus, when they talk about integrating TRIO programs or integrating student support services programs into their larger activities, their larger first generation support systems, they look at 4 questions. Is it within congressional intent that student support services staff be involved in campus-wide support, developing campus-wide support? The second question is, what do the regulations say that I can do, that a student support services program can do, that is not directly serving student support services students? Thirdly, Do the regulations make it hard for TRIO staff member to assume a larger role on campus? Can a TRIO director or a TRIO assistant director take charge of a first generation center or not? Can they be in charge of planning the first generation celebration that is campus wide? Is that possible or not possible? And then lastly, what are the things to be most concerned about when an institution moves down the path of including TRIO professionals as central to the planning of first generation services? So next slide. I think we oftentimes get caught in the weeds of regulation and forget to go back to the legislation and the purpose of TRIO programs. And the purpose of student support services that's laid out specifically in the law is to increase the college retention and graduation rates of eligible students, so the students that the program is serving, to increase the transfer rates of students that are two-year schools to four-year schools. And then the third element of the purpose of student support services is to foster an institutional climate that is supportive of the success of targeted students. So it's central to the purpose of student support services, not just to work with a limited number of students in a walled off environment, but to change the institutional climate so that it is more supportive of the success of these students. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the council has a research unit, the Pell Institute for the Study of Opportunity in Higher Education, and each year we publish a report. This year's report shows, for example, that in four-year colleges generally, 73% of students who are neither first generation nor low income get a degree. This is dependent students within 6 years. Where if you're both first generation and low income, only 41% of the students graduate within 4 years, within 6 years. At a two-year campus, if you're low income and first generation, your chance of graduating is 11%, completing a certificate or a degree, compared to double that number if you're neither first generation or low income. So you see why Paul's vision from a campus-wide level is so important. If every time you admit a low-income first-generation student, you know that your campus retention numbers and graduation numbers are affected by that because you can't bump that number up, you are concerned. Next slide, please. And we're going to start to take questions in a couple minutes. So if anybody has questions, please do put them in the question and answer box. The OMB, what they call the super circular. So it's part two of the federal regulations, section 200, talks about when you compensate somebody with a federal grant, under a federal grant. And it says allowable activities. Charges to federal awards may include reasonable amounts for activities contributing to and directly related to work under a grant. An agreement means a grant, such as delivering lectures about specific aspects of the ongoing activity, writing reports. Now remember, they're writing this mainly when they think about people that are doing research. So for a TRIO educator, that means serving on committees, being involved in planning campus-wide activities. It means being part of the campus as a whole. Your compensation, you're being funded 100% by the grant, still allows you to do that under the general provisions that are published in OMB. And then the next slide, please. Can a TRIO director take responsibility for students that are not TRIO eligible, or for students who are more students than can be served by the grant? Yes, the regulations do allow that. They state specifically that A grantee must employ a full-time project director unless the director is also administering up to 2 additional programs for disadvantaged students operated by the sponsoring institution and agency. So it would be more than permissible for a director of student support services to also be director of a program for DACA students, or also be director of a program for first generation students. So again, the regulations are clear that this is an allowable structure. And in fact, the director can direct up to 3 programs without any permission at all from the Department of Education. It does require permission if the director is going to direct more than 3 programs. And then the next slide. This is true for staff members as others. The secretary, this again is straight out of our regulations. The secretary encourages grantees to coordinate project services with other programs for disadvantaged students operated by the sponsoring agency, regardless of where that program is funded from, as long as student support services funds are not used to support activities that are reasonably allowable to the whole student body. So if you have a program that everybody on campus can have access to, that's not something that a TRIO director can direct within this provision of our regulations. So I'm going to stop there and go to any questions we might have.
All right. The first one is the slideshow going to be sent out? So I want to let people know that the slide deck as well as the recording to this webinar will be sent out. It will take us about a week and a half to get it to all participants. Next question is, what advice would you give to address philosophical differences about serving students? At my institution, I have heard from the Dean of Enrollment Services that our program enables students.
I think maybe that's a question that we're going to push off to Greg and Sharante when they talk about getting to the table at the end of this webinar. I think there's and Paul, you may want to say something about this right now. There's a theory among many campus offices that support needs to be rationed. And so it's easiest said seen in financial aid. We have so much financial aid, so we're going to divide it among everybody who's eligible. The fact that it doesn't give anybody enough money to actually be on a level playing field with people that don't have need is ignored. It's kind of a rationing approach. Where TRIO has an approach that it's better to provide students those services that they need in order to be able to be retained and graduate, even if that means for the institution to say, I'm not equipped to serve some students that have really much greater need than we're able to support. Paul, do you have anything to add to that or to?
Yes, I think that is such an important question. And one of the things that the way it's often framed by our faculty is, it seems like you're hand-holding, and we're totally against hand-holding. I think we need to change the narrative about what we do and how we're doing it. We need to be able to say, we're not hand-holding. We have an intentional process to build the capacity of our students so that they become strong, independent learners. And this is the way that we do that. And these are educationally sound approaches. I think when we can reframe the narrative and absolutely not allow people to continue the narrative about hand-holding and enabling, that's not so easily done, but we need to take control of the narrative to describe more accurately what we do.
I've been working with an institution not hundreds, but anyway, one particular comes to mind. And it does help, I think, if you involve the deans of the various colleges in your support system, so that they see themselves as part of this capacity building process, and that you don't try to do it all by yourself, faculty and administrators from the colleges. Jolie?
I will keep this this question though open so that we could revisit it once Greg and Charante have their piece as well.
Right.
Next question, our two-year institution wants to replicate our SSS peer mentoring program using the model our TRIO advisor has developed and implemented. How do we balance being helpful but also keeping our program unique from the rest of the institution?
You know, sometimes concerns like being unique are can be overstated. If you really think that replicating your peer mentoring program is going to allow even 10 more students to be retained and graduate, my advice would be get all in and help them do it as much as you can. A lot of times people make the mistake of thinking that it's services that allow students to build the capacities that Paul talked about. It really isn't services, in my mind, that allow this capacity building. It is programs, it is people, it is a web of support that is created. So I don't think you have to be afraid that by helping the institution model something after what you're doing, you're going to be less, stand out less or be effective.
Could I add, Maureen, that at the same time, it's highly unlikely that one little piece, one particular service, if replicated, is going to produce the same effect that a whole range of services does. And so it's really important to track it. What is the difference produced by that new program as compared to the whole program of services? Making sure that you're developing comparisons between equivalent students. You know, given equivalent students, what's the difference in outcome? So I would do that quietly in the background, not as a defensive posture, but to be able to talk in the end about the whole range of services and its power.
Only maybe one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to Greg and Charante and Paul again to talk about exactly how programs are structured at their institutions.
Perfect. So can you oversee institutional programs even if you are fully funded by the grants? For example, a state-funded program for foster care youth. I oversee two TRIO programs and fully funded by both. What about staff time and effort in this particular case?
In that particular case, first you should be able to make a reasonable judgment about how much time you would be devoting to the program for foster youth, and that money should be part of your salary. So if that's going to take 10% of your time, then you should get 10% of your salary either from that grant itself or from other sources within the institution. No, you can't be administering a program, directing a program for a different population and paying for it with TRIO funding. So, Greg, I think we'll start with you in terms of how you've developed the center at Boise State.
Okay, well, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, oftentimes when people hear that our TRIO programs and center is housed in a college, You know, and on many campuses, they are housed in student affairs offices. But, you know, it's just by chance, really, if you go back to the 80s, when 5 programs were first established on our campus, they were all written by a College of Ed faculty member. And that's really how it kind of happened on our campus. Eventually, this was I'm accidentally hitting my mute. And by the time you get to, you know, after the 5 programs had existed for a while, when you get into the 90s, a little more organizational structure came upon us, and a center was created. And so we had this center that was established in 1997 on our campus. And with that, you know, there was not much going on still on campus in terms of a lot of collaboration among people, even within the programs. And it wasn't until we established a center that I think then that we were able to then develop a lot more grant writing capacity. And, you know, I did McNair in 2003, and then the center started taking off. I had mentioned that we had a new president that year in 2003. And when his administration was really focused on developing research on our campus, because up to that point in time, we weren't much of a research institution. In fact, we weren't at all. And so there wasn't a whole lot of money. Not very many faculty were writing grants because there was very little federal money. And at that point, we had 6 programs with McNair. The next 10 years, we were encouraged to write more. And, you know, now we're up to 12 programs with Happy Camp and the 10 TRIO programs. So by the time we reached a point where we had a lot of programs, we were actually getting a lot of credibility just at the federal funding level, and, you know, kind of combined with research, because there weren't a lot of research dollars. So at a certain point early on, our center was comprising about 20% of all the federal funding that was happening on the campus. And so that was a real significant impact in us being able to say, you know, we're major players here on campus. We really want to be at the table at a lot of different places. So that helped a lot. And then we also established, we were able, with that kind of influence, the center director before me started he requested that we start accumulating some of the money from indirects into a center fund. So we actually have, the center is actually now funded with 30% of indirect money. And so that's been a really nice thing, because then for the center can then impact a lot of other things on campus. And particularly, we try and work a lot with anything that's unallowable within TRIO programs to help us do things that aren't allowable costs. So I can, you know, with center funds, I can pay for a lot of different things, as well as we established a scholarship as well for TRIO students who are TRIO participants. So every year we're giving away $2,000 scholarships to anywhere from 10 to 15 students. And anyway, just in general, this allowed us a much greater ability to get out and talk to a lot more people on campus about what we were doing. And that was really influential as we grew as a center. What else can I say? I think I'll pass it on to maybe Sharante from here.
Thank you, Sharante.
So everybody's, I guess one of the biggest conversations is everybody's structure is a little different. And so ours kind of flows a little differently as well, but that's really good to kind of hear about different structures and how everybody's situated on different campuses. Our TRIO programs actually fall under the Office of Instruction. So I know it sounds a little funny, but all of our pre-college and our college TRIO programs actually are under the Office of Instruction. We know that instruction is charged with, you know, the student learning, but in addition to that, our campus kind of has a additional responsibility as far as the wide range of initiatives, which kind of advance the university on a whole. So that's kind of where then TRIO programs kind of start being plugged in. So we actually, again, fall under our Vice President of Instruction, and then there's a division director of academic enhancement. So think of academic enhancement as a student success center, basically. So it's basically where we support students as they kind of transition to higher education, but they also sustain their progress once they get to campus. So that's kind of where our division is on a whole. And then plugged under our division director, then plugs into assistant director of access, which is B, and then our 6 federally funded TRIO program. So it kind of makes the sense to ensure that we are ensuring that our students are successful on a whole. So starting from the pre-college side all the way to the college side is kind of where they plugged us and fit us in. I kind of think that our model really, really works as far as a big collaborative and cohesive unit. So it creates this very, very large TRIO footprint and staying power on campus. So as we continue to grow and continue to gain more programs, this created a buzz, a conversation that people were really recognizing some of the great work that TRIO programs have been doing for many, many years. But the collaboration throughout our units kind of helps us make this footprint and staying power. So we brand TRIO across campus, even our pre-college programs as TRIO, just as such, to ensure that our motto is out there and that they know that we are improving the institution's community building and partnership. So in addition to our college side, of course, they also are conversating about our institutions, community building and partnerships, which at this particular point in life is extremely important. The institution wants to figure out how to be more involved in the community, how to build those partnerships, how to ensure and collaborate those relationships. So then we plug in our model, and then we use this wonderful, wonderful SSS model as a resource, which shows that students can be successful in all the initiatives that go along with student support services. And then one of the biggest things I think with our particular model is ensuring that we're using our data to tell the story. So our model focuses on, we're telling our story from this particular pipeline that can be served from our middle school and pre-college programs to then go into our college-based programs. So we can show how our model represents all of those things. So that's one of the reasons why TRIO programs work on our institution under instruction very well.
Well, thanks, Sharante. And Paul, let's go to Colorado State, which has a different approach.
Paul, you're muted.
There, and what I said just before that was entirely brilliant, I can guarantee. Go ahead and next slide, please. So the context for our approach was and is a high priority, high visibility institutional initiative to increase student retention and graduation rates and eliminate inequitable retention and graduation outcome gaps. And I think it was really important that we made a commitment not just to say those things, because most every institution says something about that. We were committed to doing it, to getting it done. And I had some responsibility for making that happen. And so when we thought about, well, how will we literally make that happen? We looked around for the most important, most effective models that we had. Where are we actually already making a difference? Well, student success, student support services was literally one of those places. We were able to calculate using the data that SSS always keeps on outcomes. We were able to calculate that student support services was already making a 4 percentage point difference in to the equity and graduation rates. Now, for us, the graduation gap for first generation and low income students is 10 percentage points. Well, it turns out if we didn't have SSS, we were able to demonstrate that our gap would be 14 percentage points before we did anything. So recognizing the impact that we were already seeing from SSS, we decided, well, that's a place that we ought to build upon. So what if we served an additional 100 students and had the same rate of success for those students? And what we're able to demonstrate is that that would make a difference of about 15%, 1.5 percentage points in that gap that we were trying to reduce. Now, I want to make an important point here, and that is that we're an institution of about 30,000 students. There are certainly institutions that are larger than ours, but there are many that are smaller. We serve in student support services before this initiative, we serve about 1% of students. But because it's so carefully targeted on first generation low income students and students with greatest needs, we are making a tremendous difference. At a smaller institution, it would magnify the difference that you're making way beyond even what we were able to demonstrate on our campus. Next slide, please. So what were we trying to buy when we said we want to fund in order to serve more students? We were trying to maximize these things. The connection between financial aid and other kinds of supports, academic, personal, and social. Second, what SSS is able to do in terms of active and intrusive outreach, monitoring, and support, all based on honoring and authentic relationships. Third, the reinforcement of the narrative about first generation that exists with TRIO programs, and first generation experience being an honorable characteristic, an asset to the institution. Also, the understanding that inclusion of first generation students is a really honorable institutional responsibility. And indeed, our institution has come to make it a trademark all throughout the state and beyond of what it thinks it is most important about our institution. We wanted to capitalize on the focus on data and outcomes that TRIO and SSS had, and the construction of a system of services and supports that structures students' educational experience and produce graduation success. Those are the things that we were, I'll use the term buying. Next slide, please. And so the institution provided additional resources, funds, personnel, and space to increase the number of students served. And because we segregated those funds and dedicated them, we were also able to serve additional kinds of first generation and low income students, for example, DACA students. And this, I want to emphasize that this was kind of a deal. This was a deal between the institution and the program saying, we want to buy these additional points in gap closing, and we'll provide the funds to do that. In this case, $160,000 annually into the future to serve an additional 100 students. And what we intend to get in return is 15% of the way towards our institutional goal. Now, the last thing that we did was to position the program and its staff so that we could inject the important pieces of the model into other campus efforts with full involvement of SS staff, and so that their knowledge was involved in the implementation. For example, the Community for Excellence is a program based very closely on aspects of the student support services model. The First Generation Award that we began in 1984 borrows heavily on SSS approaches, and we've injected that into other scholarship and award programs as well. But in our case, what we said was, why would we build a new program when we can take advantage of the existing infrastructure, knowledge, and experience of the program? Let's simply build on top of that so that we can serve additional students for greater impact. But all this requires that we be at the table for the discussion. And so talking about the ways to get involved in the discussion, to be at the table, to be in the room, to borrow something that's current in the news. Sharante and Greg are going to discuss more.
Go ahead, Sharante. I'll let you go first this time.
So just to, I guess, as we transition into kind of talking about getting to the table. So when you start thinking about really getting to the table, it really means telling your story and telling and selling your story to the campus, not just telling a story, but you have to sell the information that you have. So this goes back to then putting together a a information data sheet that shares all the wonderful data, the success stories, the highlights, the program goals, and so forth of TRIO programs that kind of goes with what the institution is trying to increase anyway. So then you're selling and telling your story, and then everybody wants to know how is this model or how is this program going to help at all on our campus. So you have to show that your worth on campus, that we actually have some great things going on, we're doing this, we're doing that, and so forth, and also partnership, but also knowing what your program is worth as far as the resources that come along with TRIO programs, and along with the of course the money that comes along with TRIO programs, but also the resources and the connections and the development and the education and so forth that comes along with TRIO programs. So being able to sell and tell your story to the university, and also how will TRIO programs kind of fit into that whole bigger picture of what's going on campus? How can we fit into getting noticed, and how can we make sure that we're doing some great things? So making sure that, again, that you know the resources and the worth of your TRIO programs, and then be confident in all the great things that you bring, and then be political, be ready to be political, talk the talk, and then walk the walk. So make sure that you're political, have your information and always be ready. I always say, have a elevator speech ready at all times, because to get to the table, you have to be ready to spout your information and say your information and develop your data really quickly in a small amount of time. Because if you do get that meeting with the president, or if you do get that meeting with the VP, then you need to be able to get to the table and say what you have to say, get it succinct, be political, and get your information out there. And then that way you'll get noticed, because people will say, oh, I met her, she told me 2 minutes about what TRIO programs was, and I felt like I know everything. So be able to have that elevator speech ready to be able to get to the table, and then also providing these stellar opportunities for students. There's nowhere you can go and provide these wonderful stellar opportunities for our students without TRIO programs. So also being able to sell that, again, it goes back to make sure you can get an executive summary of your programs, and show all the wonderful work that you're doing, and that you can help increase the numbers of enrollment and persistence at the university or institution that you're at, and all these resources that come along with this underserved population that you're bringing. So as far as getting to the table, always be ready to sell and talk about your story, and that you can be a resource and an access to outreach, and that you can leverage the bigger conversation that's now going on with first generation. So you can be involved in these conversations that are now happening, because TRIO has always been there, and TRIO has been having this conversation for many, many years.
Greg, before you start, I'm gonna play the white woman in the room. I think one of the interesting things about the movement we're seeing today against police brutality, against systemic inequality in the criminal justice system, is that it happened in a place where people considered themselves to be liberal and progressive, and yet all these systemic inequalities were there. And on most of our campuses, they're there too. Black students, poor students, just are facing obstacles that other students aren't facing. And African American, Hispanic professionals are oftentimes feel like they're excluded because of their race, or they're just not seen. Sharante, I'm sure that in your experience, you've encountered that sometimes. And Greg, I'm going to ask you to address it as well. What do you do in those situations?
So as a Black woman, 100%, you're already fighting a battle daily with being a woman. Then you're fighting a major battle with being a Black woman, and also with the conversation, as far as you always want to have your conversation, but you don't want to be perceived as this angry Black woman. So you have to always be mindful of your conversation, because either it's unfortunate that as a Black woman, you have to either be in that almost a silent Black woman, or people may conceive or construe you as a angry Black woman. So making sure that when you do have your conversation, again, that you have well thought through your process and your planning, and that as you are having conversations and building your rapport and reputation across campus as somebody with the resource with this particular population, not just because I'm Black, but because I have the information to be able to share and the resources and the knowledge to be able to have that information. So that's why I really think it's so important for you to know your information as you are starting to share this, as you are trying to get your voice, and then sell yourself as a resource. So sell yourself as somebody who can have that conversation across many different platforms and across many different levels.
Right. Give you 1 minute to add to what Sharante has said, because we do want the NASPA First Generation Center to be able to speak for a few minutes, and we've.
I don't really think I have much to add. I mean, similarly, I mean, I think it's very important to just work with institutional research. Be sure you have really good data. You know, we do our APRs, so we know what that looks like on our campus. I think I'm always just trying to show the importance of the work we do through the, you know, the need for it. You know, we can show, like Paul was mentioning earlier, the gap between the differences between, you know, our population versus the other students on campus. I think we, you know, on my campus, I just keep pushing that. My dean, I'm directly above me, and the dean before her, I've always asked me to provide data so they could show that to presidents and you know, whoever else they're going to be meeting with. So I've just always pushed in that direction. I'm keeping it to a minute, right? I have a lot more I could say, but I'll stop there.
I have room here for a whole other webinar, so we'll do another webinar. But I'd love to turn it over to the First Generation Center, and Dina, if you could speak. And I'm not sure if Sarah's able to join us as well.
Yes, Sarah is here. I want to thank you all so much for allowing us to continue this really excellent partnership. Thank you to our presenters for really sharing so many resources. And I think it's a really wonderful transition at this point in the program that we begin talking about celebration and raising awareness, which is the First Generation College Celebration. Many of you know that 2017 was the inaugural First Generation College Celebration. And this celebration came out of the Council for Opportunity and Education, and we have been so honored to join this partnership. Angela, could you advance, please? For the past 3 years, we've seen a considerable growth surrounding Celebration Day, and it has prompted us to ramp up resources and support offerings. So from this, you will have noticed that the Celebration Day page, which my colleague Bobby has added to the chat, has included a section surrounding resources for TRIO programs, a media kit to support any press release your institution may share to local or even broader news outlets. It includes social visuals and shareables, a 101 ways to celebrate on November 8, courtesy of our Senior Director, Dr. Sarah Whitley, and now a grant opportunity, which I'll share a little bit more on in a little bit. And in 2019, that grant opportunity supported 24 institutions to grow their planned events. Angelica, please advance. So a little bit why November 8. It was selected for the date in honor of the anniversary of the signing of the Higher Education Act of 1965. As many of you know, this is lots of foundational knowledge to the work that you already do every day. But included in this particular section is a wonderful blog that offers additional information surrounding the Higher Education Act of 1965, the creation of federal TRIO programs, and a history of the National First Generation College Celebration. So just a really wonderful piece of information to share. In the next slide. There is a section that's dedicated to institution highlights. You will notice 100+ institution highlights. And in fact, across 2018 and 2019, there are over 200 institution highlights. And it demonstrates how institutions have taken a multitude of approaches, from a week-long celebration, a dedicated entire day of events, and many other institutions have found opportunities to create cross-campus and community partnerships. And an opportunity for you all is to submit your plans for the 2020 celebration, and your institution plans will be published to the website, and you'll be able to share to a broader audience. In the next slide. Should be one more maybe.
Sorry, my computer went a little haywire. Hold on one second.
No worries, thank you.
Oh, it keeps going to the, it keeps jumping to the URL address. So hold on. There you go.
Perfect, thank you so much. This particular page will be of great resource to you all, or our colleagues at COE put together resources, specific guidelines of where supplies are considered allowable costs. So this might be of great interest to you all. On the next slide, we get into the grant opportunity. So the grant opportunity is currently open. We are welcoming applications from eligible institutions. We recommend that folks check out the eligibility requirements and submit applications, and know that funds are awarded up to $500 in support of your events, and your event doesn't have to happen on Celebration Day on November 8th. Many of you know that Celebration Day is on a Sunday this year, and while institutions may be taking many alternative approaches, we recommend that you take a look at some of the ideas that we've offered. And then on this next slide, so November 8 carries great significance, and while it falls on a Sunday, as I previously mentioned, that's going to be the date that we continue to honor for First Generation College Celebration. This is an opportunity for you all to determine the best approach that meets the unique needs of your First Gen student, staff, and faculty. And alternative approaches may include virtual celebrations. There are a bunch of resources across social platforms that you might utilize, and we've included some examples. You may include some opportunities to connect with parents and families of First Generation College students, as it is a weekend, or possibly considering collaboration with Student Veteran Services. Many of you know that student veterans identify, over 60%, of student veterans identify as First Gen. So this is a wonderful collaborative opportunity. I want to thank you all again so much for including the center, and just really appreciate all the work that you all do.
And this is Maureen again. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. If you take a minute to put in the question box, or to email Angelica Villalpando at coenet.org, anything else you would like in this vein, anything COE can provide you that you think can help with the First Generation Collaborative, with NASPA, and involving and heightening the status, the visibility of TRIO programs on campuses. So again, thank you very much. Take care.